All right, in this video, I'm going to be going over what is violence, and what is the definition of violence. The definition of violence, according to Merriam-Webster, is behavior involving physical force intended to hurt, damage, kill someone or something. Another definition, according to Wikipedia, is violence is the use of physical force so as to injure, abuse, damage, or destroy. So, what is my definition of violence? To understand my definition of violence, to understand what my definition of violence is, you must first understand what violence cannot exist without and what it can exist regardless of. Violence can't exist without knowledge. If Bill leans on a wall in one room and it triggers the roof of another room to collapse and kill Gary, is that violence? If Gary gives a peanut butter and jelly sandwich to Bill and Bill has a peanut allergy and Gary doesn't know it and Bill dies, but Gary didn't mean to kill Bill, is that violence? If Gary touches something hot and burns himself, but he didn't know it was hot, is that violence against himself? No, all of these things are accidents. Violence cannot be an accident. Violence cannot exist without choice. If Bill is cutting some wood with a wood saw and Gary is drunk and reaches for something in the way of the wood saw and Bill accidentally cuts off Gary's finger, is that violence? No, because there is no choice. Violence cannot be an accident. Bill must choose to commit an act of violence against Gary, and the choice of committing violence can't exist without the knowledge that you are committing violence. Violence can't exist without intention. Uh, with both choice and knowledge of violence, this adds up to intention. There must be intention to commit violence. Violence requires intention. Violence can't exist without sentience. If a jar of pickles falls off the top of the shelf and hits a guy over the head, is that violence? No, because there must be sentience. Violence can only be caused by a sentient consciousness. That also works in reverse. The man picking up the jar that fell on his head and smashing it is not violence. Violence can only exist when it's done against another sentient creature. Violence cannot exist against an inanimate object. Property destruction is not violence. Violence can't exist without awareness. If a guy is in the hospital and he is in a coma, and that hospital gets fired upon by terrorists, and that guy in the hospital gets a grazing bullet wound across his nose, but he wakes up in a month and his wound is totally healed, and he never would have known that he was injured unless somebody told him. Is that violence? If a battlefield doctor named Greg is amputating a patient's leg, gangrene infected leg named Trevor, to save his life, and Trevor is knocked out, is that violence? No. When someone is asleep, they are no longer aware, and you must be aware of violence for it to be violence. For violence to exist, there must be awareness. Violence cannot exist without some form of impediment. If a small woman is punching a man and is neither hurting him nor causing any pain, is that violence? If a man is being punched by another man but is protecting himself and he is not hurt but it causes pain, is that violence? If Battlefield Dr. Greg is amputating Trevor's gangrene infected leg to save his life and Trevor is resisting and the guards hold down Trevor while Greg takes his leg, or Trevor is strapped down, is that violence? What if Trevor is asleep? It is violence if Trevor is awake. It isn't violence if Trevor is asleep. The person must be aware of violence for that violence to be for that violence to be considered violence. Violence cannot be done upon that which has no awareness or comprehension of the violence, and that a person must be aware of some form of impediment. Violence cannot exist without physical force. Can non-physical forms of communication be violence? Can a person not speaking be violence? Can a person speaking be violence? Can books or movies or other non-forms of communication be violence? No, violence must absolutely be physical for it to be violence. Violence can exist regardless of consent. Violence can occur regardless if all parties involved do not consent or not. For example, if a fight happens and one guy doesn't want to fight, that's violence. But if two guys in a martial arts gym are sparring and both have consented, that is also violence, even when both have consented to spar. So violence can exist regardless of consent. Violence can exist regardless of harm. Violence occurs regardless of harm. All violence needs to exist is some form of impediment. Not harm. Harm does not need to happen for violence to exist. Violence can exist regardless of pain. Violence occurs regardless of pain as long as you are aware of the impediment. The harm or pain is irrelevant. Violence can exist regardless of target. Violence can exist regardless of target. All that needs to happen for violence to happen is the knowledge, choice, and intention and awareness that you are committing violence. For example, if you shoot someone and miss and the bullet hits someone else, but you didn't intend to shoot that person, is that violence? Yes, because the necessary knowledge and choice and awareness of the violence was behind the bullet no matter who it hits. But what if the target is yourself? Can you commit violence against yourself? Yes, even if you punch yourself in the face, that is a punch directed at a living, aware, sentient creature. Then it's violence, regardless, even if that creature is yourself. Violence can exist regardless of combat. Violence can occur regardless of combat. You do not need to fight back to have violence be done upon you. Violence can exist regardless of reciprocation. Violence can occur regardless of reciprocation. You do not need to reciprocate the violence done to you for violence to occur. Violence can exist regardless of proxy. What if someone sends an AI drone to kill someone? Is that violence? Yes, there's choice, knowledge, and awareness and intention to commit violence even if they don't commit it directly. Violence can be committed through an AI proxy. Violence can occur regardless of time. What if someone plants a landmine down on the ground and a few days later a man steps on it and blows his leg off? Is that violence? Yes, violence can occur regardless of time or latency. Violence can indeed be committed in the present by an act in the past. Violence can exist regardless of death. What if a man plants a landmine down and that man gets killed in combat and then his enemy comes along and gets himself killed stepping on the landmine? Is that violence? Yes, that is violence. Even a dead man can commit violence. So, in summary, violence can't exist without knowledge. It can't exist without choice. It can't exist without intention. It cannot exist without sentience. It cannot exist without awareness. It cannot exist without some form of impediment. Violence can't exist without physical force. It can exist regardless of consent. It can exist regardless of harm, pain, target, combat, reciprocation, proxy, time, and death. So there you go. That is my definition of what violence is.